You're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia 106.5 FM. My favorite phrase, people-powered media. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Ray Collazo, the host of What's Next, the radio program at WPPM Radio and Ray's Latino Talk podcast that explores news, politics, and all the hottest issues from a diverse perspective. My co-host, the co-pilot on the mothership here, Yashira Rivera, affectionately known in the hood as Yaya.
In the hood.
What's going on, girl?
I'm doing awesome. How are you?
Because I know you don't walk around in Pennsylvania Dutch country talking about, hola, yo soy Yaya. I'm sure you're Yashira.
No, I say, hi, my name is Yashira Rivera.
Yashira Rivera. That sounds like something that the Trump administration would ban. The USDA. Thank you so much for joining us as always.
Yes.
We give our love to the executive producer and the queen of community
all
radio mothership.
All the love.
Vanessa Maria Graber.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for producing the show and welcoming us to the WPPM family. And, of course, this is also Ray's Latino Talk podcast. So if you're part of our podcast family, thank you so much for joining us. You know, the biggest fan that we have, I got to give him a shout-out of the podcast, is a guy that lives in the middle of nowhere in eastern Washington, Leo Perales.
I love that.
Leo,
in Eastern Washington?
Eastern Washington, big Latino community, rural area there. And so I just want to give him love because he's consistently the one that shares and comments on our stuff. He just ran for state senate in Washington.
That's excellent. That's awesome.
So he lives the lyrics and he's doing his thing. Very similar vibe to Lebanon, PA, where you're from, Yaya.
I don't know. Have you been to where I'm from?
Yes, I have. and they immediately chased me out.
Immediately.
This is a chock-full show. So we're going to be very Puerto Rican. We're going to talk very fast because we got a lot going on. Of course, we're going to get into the government shutdown, the latest, and kind of what's our personal lessons from this very intense situation. We've got to update people on something everyone in the room is very passionate about, Puerto Rico. It's been in the news, not only from a Puerto Rican perspective, but sort of national politics perspective lately. A lot going on, and culminating the Jimmy Fallon show on Tuesday. You are a very integral part of the Women's March coming up this weekend, Yaya. So we not only got to give you some love and some shout-outs on that, but kind of talk about kind of where the Women's March and the women's movement is from your perspective.
Absolutely.
And, you know, to get the perspective of really what's going on, impacting real people, not only is the shutdown impacting our 800,000 federal workers, their families, their business networks, including approximately 60,000 Latino federal workers.
That's a lot.
Including some people very close in my life. But also the rhetoric behind what's happening on our southern border and what's really happening. So we're going to have an activist, one of our fantastic Latino leaders in South Texas, Tricia Cortez, calling in the middle of the show. And in our Being Boricua segment, I'm going to get into some serious FOMO. I'm just going to let people know. And I must say, quite a Cardi B fanboy nowadays. So
I'm a huge Cardi B fan. I wasn't at first because I was like, what? And, when I started following her on all social media platforms, I slowly began to fall in love. And I absolutely am in love with her album. I mean, I had a weekend with my fiance where we sat down and we listened to her album, beginning to end. And we're like, wow, I loved it. I mean, I'm a huge Cardi B fan. What am I going to say?
Well, we're going to get into that. Cardi had U.S. senators retweeting her last night. A lot going on.
No. They tried. They were
they debated. Yeah. They said, she's a little vulgar, and Schatz and Booker and Murphy and all those guys. And then Schumer came in and said, so are you going to do it or not? Very impressed that Schumer even knows what Twitter is. Kim, get on Twitter. Before we get into these topics, just want to remind people again for our podcast audience, thank you for joining Ray's Latino Talk podcast. I'm here. This is your host, Ray Collazo, our co-host, Yashira Yaya Rivera.
That's right.
You can subscribe and download anywhere you can download a podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud. Please write and review. You guys text me, you Facebook message me. We love the show. We love the show. We love the show. Well, give us some love and give us some
love.
Review
comment
on the platform.
Comment, send us inboxes. You can find me as well. Tagged onto Ray's social media. Be sure to send me messages as well. Show me love. We're open to suggestions. We're open to topics.
And we got to keep the conversations going. This audio, this is when we have our time to kind of coalesce and discuss these things. But we keep these conversations and topics going 24/7. We're both social media freaks. My Twitter handle's at Ray's Podcast, and I'm on IG at As Ray's Latino Talk. And, of course, we're on Facebook. Where can people keep the conversation going with you, Yaya?
Keep the conversation with me at Yaya, YAYA _ Rivera, RIVERA _ So, and if you also Google Yaya Rivera or Yaya Montage with a 0, I'm pretty easy to find.
Awesome. So let's get into the social media. So before we get into the government shutdown and some thoughts and reflections, some updates, and again, we're going to talk about Puerto Rico. There's a lot going on. I did want to say I do have a serious social media issue we have to discuss. Being Puerto Rican, is a blessing and a curse. And one of the blessings of it is that we're surrounded by beauty. We're such beautiful people. We're from a beautiful place. We're so colorful. That was a big part of the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show theme, the color, the music. We're so good looking. But the downside of that is most of our people are quite aware of their looks and their attractiveness. So when the Facebook 10-year profile pic challenge overtook us over this last week, I must say that I was just overwhelmed by because all these good-looking people, because there was so much humble bragging.
I mean, I wasn't one of those people, but I was, because I didn't share it like on my Instagram, but I did do it in my Instagram story.
Yes.
And which is connected to my Facebook. So people did see how I didn't really age. It's more of like
yes, of course.
It's more of like an internal rotting thing, like it's from the inside out.
Yes.
But like so physically, I'm holding it together.
This is what I've dealt with over the last 5. A lot of humble bragging going on. A word to my folks. We know y'all look good. There's no question about that. And certainly, what's probably improved over the last 10 years is smartphone lighting. Did you notice the lighting? The contrast was something.
There's mobile apps that can make you look like a complete other person.
Exactly.
I found out about a mobile app last week where it can make you look like you have abs. Like you Photoshop
that
abs
one I definitely
to
need.
your
My
abdomen.
God, where did you get that? I'll slide you a 5. If you can help me with that one.
No, the one I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just slide in like a 6-pack of some type of beer, and I'm gonna Photoshop that onto my belly.
That's outstanding.
Like an adult.
So I just to wrap it up, just want to let people know we know y'all got it going on. You just don't have to rub it in our faces. The other thing that was funny about it was that on the flip side, my nerdy people, which I love so much, were hating. So there was totally like this battle between the people that were doing the profile pics. They could see how they didn't have an age and actually look better. And they were real humble about it, like, oh, I guess I've aged, whatever. But then there was like the haters that were forwarding the articles about, Facebook's using this for facial recognition.
No, they've done that like 100 years ago. So they're behind. I mean, facial recognition is something that I learned in recent years that other countries use to start getting on public transportation. So it's like through the Retina display, or Retina API. So I mean, that's been around forever. So no, Facebook already knows where you live, how old you are, how many kids you have.
Right? I guess that's our attitude.
Our cell phones hear us. So I mean, no. I mean, they know who we are a long time ago. And we're Puerto Ricans, so they've known at birth.
Yeah. We're probably on the Contempro CIA watch list, you and I. But it's interesting because it's amazing how in 10 years, besides all y'all not aging at all my wonderful friends out there, but that it went from thinking about the internet like, oh, we have to be careful, identity, and now people just don't give a damn. They just figure everyone knows everything anyway. And that's so anyway, props to our very humble Facebook family out there. You can listen to Ray's talk show. We have to get into, in this segment, we wanted to just touch a little on the government shutdown. It hasn't gone anywhere. Yeah. My friends always come to me because they're like, oh, Ralph, you're the political person. When's it going to end? When's it going to end? When it's going to end?
So when is it going to end? And,
well, we don't know. And that's the frustrating thing about it. So many times, this is not an uncommon tactic in history. As Cardi B mentioned on her Instagram, on her post last night, Obama had one that lasted 17 days. That was over health care and substantive issues.
The Affordable Care Act, if I'm not
Exactly,
mistaken.
Yeah. So, but this is, there is, unlike all these other times, there was a political endgame to a process as part of a negotiation where this was just basically off the seat of his pants. And again, as we've said many times, this president has nothing else to offer but hate. And I do want to correct myself because on last week's show I said this is really about one person. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans, and that's partially true. But at this point, it's clear that the Senate Republicans, who could end this tomorrow with a veto-proof passing of the bill and veto his override his veto, are just sitting on the sidelines. And it's very interesting because it's to the point where you almost question their motives.
No, absolutely.
And their leadership.
Because, at the end of the day, I feel that a lot of the messaging behind the wall has been misconstrued because we do need border security. We do need security in general. But instead it's been turned into everything about the wall, which it initially, or actually at this point it is. A lot of talk about we need a wall, we need a wall, we need a wall. Yes, we do need border security, but a wall isn't going to fix that.
That's right. And we need security, right? So and this is the frustrating thing about it, and there's a budgetary issue here because Democrats in the course of trying not to look weak on defense or weak on this issue have given in for a few decades on funding. We have a very militarized border. We're going to talk to Tricia Cortez in a moment around the fallacy of this being an emergency. There's all kind of evidence that comes directly from this administration's resources to speak to the fact that the majority of undocumented immigration comes from people overstaying their visas. These are people that are flying into our country and coming in initially legally. The largest group in that category are Canadians, and there's no great...
and students, if I'm not mistaken.
And there's students, so there's
students,
it's people that, hey, you get here, you're enjoying yourself, you start dating somebody, you stick around. So and not to say that we shouldn't address that, but part of the reason that's happening is because our legal immigration system is very broken, and if anything, this administration is trying to make it harder for us to come here legally. So what are we supposed to do? So this is a made-up crisis that's basically here to scare white people that live in this country, that see a changing country, see a new Mexican restaurant on the corner, and feel like, and this brings up their own insecurities and anxieties. And the bottom line is that, to those that say, well, it's just $5 billion. Why don't the Democrats give in, be the bigger people? Let's just move on. I would say to you, it's like any relationship we have in our lives. Yeah, right? Like,
that's right. Any relationship we have in our life, there has to be compromise.
Well, there has to be compromise, but also there has to be standards. Because at the end of the day, if, and we've all been in a situation in relationships in our lives where the other person is just not up to our standards, and this interaction, and we either can choose to drop it and cut our losses and just let it go and give in, or we have to, on some level, stand up for ourselves. So as a country, and the Democrats are now finally doing this, is standing up to say, enough is enough. Demonizing these people that, if anything, I can argue that our Border and Customs officials are more of a danger to these immigrants. 2 of these young people have died, thousands of which are basically being incarcerated, separated from their families, then vice versa. So, there has to be a line drawn, and I think it's important, for us to take this as a personal lesson. And at some point, we have to stand up to these forces that, at this point, you can openly question whether, is Russia in charge here? So, we have to stand up to this.
No, and I think one of the most important things is the method and the verbiage behind why we need the wall. I hear a lot of talk about MS-13s. I hear a lot of talk about Hispanics. I hear a lot about talk about criminals and rapists and so forth and so on, which not only was said once, it was said multiple times. And for those of you who are listening and those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, the MS-13s, I just want you to do research, because it's a gang that originated in the United States in a Los Angeles prison, if I'm not mistaken. So to say that MS-13s came from South and Central America, yes, their heritage and their culture, but it originated here in the United States.
No, and the other thing about that is that it's a whole other set of conversations. And the Obama administration has some blood on their hands with this too, because part of the reason that the Northern Triangle countries, Central America, are having this instability is that, we frequently come into, and this happened in Honduras several years during the Obama years, and Clinton and Obama had something to do with this, is that we for our own political purposes, foment civil wars and distress, when we should be trying to support these countries. We have, the issues not with Mexico. Mexico is a relatively stable country. Why can't relatively small countries should be able to support these people and address this issue from the root of it, instead of demonizing them when they're just trying to live a better life? And you're listening to Yaga Rivera and Ray Collazo on What's Next, WPPM LP Philadelphia, as well as Ray's Latino Talk podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, let's catch our breath, because there's so much to talk about, and I guess there's so much to talk about. I guess from your perspective, what else? The other part of this, which I'm very concerned about, but I think it brings up this conversation, is the media's doing the stories you would expect, right? They're talking to someone that's going to get kicked out, that's got a mortgage due, is stressing about the bills. But what's this bringing up is that, and I think we estimate about 8% of the country lives paycheck to paycheck. And you could see the look in people's eyes and the tone. It's not so much missing that credit payment. It's the embarrassment that they feel by feeling like they're living that way, when they feel like,
it's trauma.
It's a great sense of trauma and embarrassment, and it's bringing up that income inequality issue, for sure.
I think what's most problematic is that, throughout life, you hear, you need a good government job, get a good government job, work for the government, good benefits, great perks. And a lot of people take that route. And, especially in my community that I grew up in near Harrisburg, a lot of people want to work at the Capitol and want to have those
good job, good government job. What he always taught,
Yeah, and a lot of the time, and now that 800,000 people are not being paid, it's really disheartening because, missing one mortgage payment turns into 2 mortgage payments, turns into not paying your car, which potentially can be repossessed, foreclosures. You're talking about, what happened to those that work for the government that have medical expenses, those who need a little bit more attention than other citizens or citizens in general who need more attention, especially, someone like me in my position. I wouldn't be able to afford my medication that I take on a daily basis for my multiple disorders. So we have to think of it in that way. I feel like we kind of dehumanize government workers because the government is what's creating the shutdown, but you have to acknowledge that the ones being affected the most are not the ones making the decision at the White House. Right. So I've kind of realized, they've decided to do it. It's like, whoever decides to go to work or being forced to work and not get paid. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if I were to be told that I have to go to work and not get paid, hold all your breaths and take all of your
deuces.
Seats. I'd be like, oh, you don't want to pay me? Bye. And, people
it's so unfair.
And it's really unfair. And a lot of people say, oh, it's easy for you to say that because you're not in that position. But no, in my life, there's been instances where people who I've worked for do not want to pay me. I will pack my little backpack up and my packed lunch.
What did Sheryl Sandberg say? Know your value. No, that's Mika Brzezinski.
Yeah.
Know your value. Know your value.
And walk out. Like, I wouldn't. No, bye.
If all those TSA people left, this would be over very quickly. But they're in a difficult position. Yeah. And so we extend our love. Shout out to my homie, Jeffrey Vargas. He's a retired federal worker who's actually doing just for free, just because he cares about people. He's doing webinars to like a support group. For federal workers. So I'll be forwarding his information on social media. We're going to take a breath. We're going to pause.
We're going to pause.
And Yaya, when we come back, not only we're going to hear from about our sponsor, but we're going to get into our news headlines. We're going to talk about the Women's March. And of course, you're getting yet another accolade this weekend. Very exciting.
Yes, I'm pretty pumped to get
this opportunity.
Got to support
our women. And we got to update people on Puerto Rico. There was a lot going on in PR the last week or so.
I can't wait to go back.
Center of the universe. So you're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia, 106.5 FM, People Power Media. And we'll come back in a moment. Welcome back. This is Ray Collazo, the host of What's Next on WPPM LP, 106.5 Philadelphia, People Powered Media. Thank you so much. I love that, People Powered Media. It's a tongue twister, for someone that English is a second language. It helps me quite a bit. Thank you so much. And again, of course, this is also Ray's Latino Talk Show. Thank you so much for joining us. A word from our sponsor of this week's episode.
Yes, sponsors. We love them, so keep them coming. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Youth Testify, a program of the National Network of Abortion Funds and Advocates for Youth. Young leaders in the Youth Testify program are sharing their abortion stories to show why it's important for them to have access to abortion care when they need it. Young folks face challenges when trying to get an abortion. They have to get permission from a judge or guardian, miss school or work for multiple appointments, and raise hundreds of dollars to pay for it. Young people need control over their lives, over their bodies, and over their futures. That's why they're leading the fight for abortion access. For more information, please visit youthtestify.org. Again, youthtestify.org.
Thank you so much. And thank you. Youth Testify. So the two headlines we wanted to get into in this segment of the What's Next show on WPPM Radio is, first of all, we got to talk about Puerto Rico.
Yes.
So Puerto Rico was very much, and I wanted to give kind of people a 5-minute kind of primer what's going on, because Puerto Rico is not only sort of front and center in a lot of conversations about the future of the island from the perspective of not only people on the island, but the diaspora, but also was a big part of the national political conversation. So there's sort of a few things I want people to note. So basically, when Lin-Manuel Miranda announced he was going to be taking the Hamilton extravaganza to the island about a year ago, it triggered a lot of conversation around not only sort of him and his father's network's impact on the island, their influence, what was going to be the positive benefit. There's a healthy discussion happening about Hamilton just being on the island. In recent days, some of our friends in the sort of more leftist progressive Puerto Rican social media community have been noting, we're sort of, honoring Hamilton is sort of funky because obviously that was from colonial times and they were slave owners. And I have to give Adriana Maestas, is a West Coast blogger and journalist, a point. She mentioned on social media. She goes, so if 100 years, if a bunch of Black Latinos did a campy musical about the Trump era, would that be cool? Interesting note. But that's been interesting how people have been bringing that up. There was a lot of controversies. They were going to do the show at La Yupi's campus. It got moved because they were nervous there would be protests, security concerns. And then a lot of people wanted to go to the party. Yeah. So when Hamilton got announced, the Bold Pack, which is basically the political action committee of the Latino Democratic members of Congress, decided to have their conference down there, the Latino Victory Fund. Ended up dovetailing to that to have their conference down there. And then, of course, Jimmy Fallon culminated the week with The Tonight Show. So the things I wanted to note on that, which is really quickly that, and Julian Castro made his first public appearance as a presidential candidate on the island. So there's a couple things. One is, on some level, and people are saying, the optics of this, being partying in Puerto Rico when the government shut down. First of all, these things get planned well ahead of time. And on some level, you got to give people a little slack because if you can't, you can't go to Puerto Rico and people don't perceive you partying. And so, like on some, true. So what? So they did tours, they had conferences. I mean, there was some serious action happening.
Which is really important because, Puerto Rico, ever since Hurricane Maria, tourism has gone down. And that is the main source of income for that island.
That's right.
So it's important. And what I think what Jimmy Fallon did was kind of brilliant because he showed all of the different things you can do in Puerto Rico, from zip lining to attending.
By the way.
Zip lining to go to different locations, the food, the culture, him dancing Bomba y Plena. So it was really important to show people that, they're up for business, especially in Old San Juan and those locations that have a lot of tourism. So that's important because now people are going to see that, the millions and millions of viewers that Jimmy Fallon has and their great social media campaign showing snippets and videos that are so lighthearted and beautiful that really portray the island from a different light that is very necessary at hard times.
And so I think you probably just laid out certainly the large majority opinion of the rank and file, particularly Puerto Ricans that live stateside, of the positive nature of this. And it was interesting, the healthy debate that was happening on a lot of levels because you had, and again, I'm friends with a lot of these people and I appreciate everyone's perspective for full disclosure, but the conversation, the sort of criticism that was taking place of Hamilton and the Mirandas really goes to a lot of the vestiges of his father and his role in the Hispanic Federation and sort of his role in New York politics, which was really interesting. So there's a lot going on. The last thing I would say really quickly is that the other thing that I want to make sure particularly people here noticed was that celebrated two of the biggest hip-hop celebrities on the island, Residente from Calle 13 and Bad Bunny, sort of broke in almost in the governor in La Fortaleza late last week. And so that was interesting because of the confluence of that, wanted to talk about political issues, and the governor responded to them. But what brought that up was La Colectiva Feminista, who's been protesting in front of the Capitol, in front of the Fortaleza for months, has been demanding that the governor declare a state of emergency because of the violence being perpetrated against the rise of violence being perpetrated against Puerto Rican women. And only after the rappers show up and barge in does he have a meeting with them, which he did a few days ago. So lots of levels, lots of conversations about Jimmy Fallon's show not featuring any Puerto Rican women celebrities. Sure. Yeah, so there was a lot of interesting conversations taking place. So we have to continue doing that. We have to continue to be involved and advocate for the island and advocate for our communities here. So we're going to take a break. When we get back, Tricia Cortez will be in the building. Welcome back to What's Next radio program here at WPPM LP people-powered media here in Philadelphia. You can also hear What's Next as Raise Latino Talk podcast. Anywhere you can download a podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud. The list goes on and on. You know, when people are having this debate about what's going on our southern border, but nobody's talking to our wonderful Latino community and our wonderful people in South Texas. And I wanted to make sure that we engaged our leadership in these conversations. So it's really an honor to have back on the show, a great fit to the show, Tricia Cortez. Tricia is the executive director of the Rio Grande International Study Center based out of Laredo, Texas. Tricia, welcome to What's Next. A shout out to our mutual friend, Angel Hernandez Rivera, Tricia, that has connected us over the years. Tricia, welcome to the show. And if you could just get right into it. I know you're very busy. If you could share with us your perspective as an activist living on our southern border and your perspective on the ongoing discussion around border security and immigration enforcement living in Laredo, Texas.
Okay, so where do you even start? It's just, it's incredible that our government has come to the point that it has, and everything is funneling down to a wall, a physical wall. And, you know, I don't know if any of your listeners have not been to the border or are not familiar with South Texas, they should come to see what it's like. You know, we're not in a crisis. There's not a security crisis or humanitarian crisis, you know, where you're on edge or you're in danger or you're seeing people just, you know, just swimming like crazy across the river. I mean, it's just not like that at all. And the reason that our organization, we're an environmental nonprofit based in Laredo, Texas, our mission is to protect and preserve the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande, it's an American heritage river, and it is an endangered river. It's one of the 10 most endangered rivers in the world. It's our only supply of drinking water for us and 6 million other people along the whole border. And so it sustains this whole ecology, not just for drinking water, but a lot of wildlife habitat and what have you. So to put a physical barrier there, you're talking about major disruptions to that, and it's a wildlife corridor as well. And that river is fed by tributaries, by creeks and stuff that are just going to be blocked by this kind of wall. And you know, it was interesting because there was a conservative TV host that came to Laredo last week. His name's Eric Bowling, and he taped like this town hall. There were different segments, and we were part of it. And what I thought was very just kind of disingenuous and what was very clever about what they were doing is that they were trying to link very blatantly the opioid epidemic and crisis in America and all that pain and anguish with the border wall.
Okay, Tricia. This is Yaya Rivera speaking, and I just wanted to ask you a quick question. You did mention, you know, how Rio Grande is, you know, it's really important to make sure to conserve that. So can you share with us how the wall and physical border structures impact the local ecosystem on an environmental level, you know, now and in the future? Because, you know, too often people think with the ecosystem that it's only now, and in reality, a lot of the things that we do impact, you know, Earth and the environment on a later scale.
Right. Okay. So, you know, they're talking about putting 18 feet of concrete and then on top of that, like 15 feet of steel. So animals, you know, animals don't, you know, their access to the river for water, for finding mates, for security, I mean, they're just going to be blocked off, right? I mean, they're just going to be blocked off. This wall is going to cross through so much private property. Most of the river frontage in Texas and in South Texas, it's privately owned land. And so some of these are just ranches that have been owned by families for generations. So this wall is going to cut through land that, you know, families have owned for so long. You know, it's going to impact animals' ability to access the river and roam freely. During times of flood, there have been some studies of how the wall in Arizona twice in rains has created a lot of damage. And so because it causes debris and water to back up, and it creates like these dams. And so I think what's really horrible about this is that they are waiving about 31 environmental and other laws. They're just not even doing environmental assessments. It's just like, out the window, and that's just extraordinary. That's extraordinary. I mean, cities, municipalities have these whole processes. If you're building in the floodplain, the River Vega, you have to go through these processes, and this wall, they're just going to do it however they're going to do it, without any kind of studies or environmental assessments, and I think that's really terrible. And of course we want border security. Just because we're against the wall doesn't mean that we don't want border security, or that we're totally open borders. Anybody and any kind of drug can just come freely in, no problem. None of us, think that or are arguing for that. And, when you talk about the opioid epidemic, unfortunately, this starts at the doctor's office, and then the illegal drugs.
It does.
Starts at Rite Aid.
The illegal drugs that get abused out.
Keep it real.
More than 90% are coming through the legal ports of entry, the bridges. So it's just hard to understand, knowing that why would the administration and Border Patrol right now continue to fight for a border wall when the greatest need is at those ports? Since so much of the illegal drugs is coming that way. And, when you look at illegal immigration, there's such a huge percentage of folks that are illegal because they've overstayed their legal visas, right? There's like this need to change the immigration system, the asylum process. Those countries need to do better for their people and provide more opportunities. The U.S. needs to really examine its role in those countries. Are we prohibiting or stopping them from being economically successful by policies that we have there?
That's right. And you're listening to Tricia Cortez, the executive director of the Rio Grande International Studies Center. Tricia, I just wanted to, she's calling in from Laredo, Texas. I just wanted to reset this conversation for our Facebook audience. And unfortunately, I don't think they can hear her, but Tricia is really schooling us around, what it feels like. And I want to ask Tricia this to really put a point on in a second, but her reflections on how this debate around this supposed crisis impacting her local community. She not only has sort of the immigrant rights activist lens, but also the environmental lens, and she's leading the charge for protecting our environment in the Rio Grande River, which, and we don't, talk about, we don't
talk about that. To be fair, this is one of the first times, Tricia, that I've actually heard about how much this will negatively impact the environment, because I feel too often in activism we forget about the environment, and to hear everything that you're saying is quite devastating. And this is a very important lens to our studio audience, and in the future, our Facebook audience, to know that this is very devastating.
That's right.
It's actually just got really bummed just hearing you say
Tricia's
that.
And Tricia, can you speak to this, because the climate change issue is very real for you, and you're seeing it day to day in the work that you're doing down there.
They say, okay, do we have a security or humanitarian crisis? And that's very debatable. And I think about a humanitarian crisis. I think about Haiti after the 2012 earthquake. I think of Yemen. I think of Syria. I think of Libya with all those refugees trying to cross into the Mediterranean, and they're getting, kidnapped and tortured and treated so brutally. Like, to me, that's a humanitarian crisis. I mean, there is an issue with these caravans coming, and there's no place to put them, and immigration and illegal immigration has shifted over the last 10 or 20 years. Before, it used to be single men that would come over and work, and then they'd go back, and then it was men and women, and now it's families. It's families coming over because, they may not be able to go back and come back like they used to. And so there is a problem with that. But I always say, look, the crisis that we're going to have if this wall comes up is an ecological crisis. And for some people, they're like, oh, well, and Eric Bolling, this TV host, said, I love birds and I love animals, but I love humans more. And it's so just frustrating to hear something like that, because, we all love animals, right? But 6 million of us depend on that water and for that river to flow properly. And, a lot of these things are irreversible when you start to tear through that land and prevent, the river floods. This happens. The river floods every every 6 to 10 years, you're talking about, 50 feet high. I mean, that river floods. And so, the impacts from the wall, can somebody talk to us about that, logically and scientifically?
A lot of questions to answer. And again, you're listening to Tricia Cortez, who's calling us. She's literally stepping out of a board meeting, I believe, the executive director of Rio Grande International Study Center. Let me tell you, Tricia, hopefully in the next Democratic administration will be in the cabinet, because this is one of the most credentialed women I know. Grew up in the hood in San Antonio, went to Princeton, got a bunch of degrees from Princeton. And Tricia has really was a journalist. I know you appreciate our journos. And,
yes.
And now has been a tremendous activist and nonprofit leader down there. We'd like to wrap this segment up, Tricia. You've so been generous of your time, but if you could just share with us, there's a lot going on in Laredo. Just really quickly, share with us quickly two things. One is, how are local people feeling? I know you're talking to people on the ground, and, we've got federal government workers that live in Laredo, Texas, that are being impacted, right? So there's a lot of elements of this. And then quickly, if you could share with us, I know the Texas legislative sessions has started, so I know you're working on some state issues. So if you could just share with us that what else should we be looking out for that you're working on that we could support you, and anything else you'd like to share about your work at Rio Grande?
Yes, please. And one of the other things real quick, Tricia, is, how can you tell the listeners, how can they learn more about this? Because I feel when it comes to the news, this is static. I don't hear anything about it. So if that can just be, how you wrap it up, just to let us know, what can we do to help you and spread the mission about this crisis in regards to the economy?
I just think, the way that everything is evolving and developing right now is it's so deeply divided. You're either here or you're there, and there's no common sense solutions being debated or discussed in a calm way, right? It's like the lines are drawn in the sand, and either you give me my border wall or hundreds of thousands of people stay without paychecks, or, the other side is saying, no border wall, which I support, right? But I understand that this cannot continue and something's got to give. And I just don't think that our entire government and nearly 1 million workers should be the pawns and their lives and day-to-day living be put at jeopardy over a physical wall. That's just very wrong. And I think that the whole process is wrong as far as the waiving of federal laws. We're talking the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. All of these are just being waived with no environmental studies for the wall. And we need to put the resources where they would make most sense, because it is a finite amount of resources that you have where it's going to be effective. And so I think people probably need to get a variety of they need to do their homework and not just get it from Fox News, because they're going to be led down a rabbit hole there, and they can't just get it from some other station that has a clear bent. There have been groups of scientists that have submitted papers about how this is going to affect the ecology long term, and those are the kinds of voices that are level-headed, that are experts, that need to be brought into this conversation.
Well, that's why, Tricia, we bring you on here, and you need your own podcast, Tricia. You got so much to break down.
Yes.
There's so much going on the border. It's such a wonderful part of our country that people know very little about. And again, you've been listening to Tricia Cortez, the executive director of Rio Grande International Study Center. Check out her work, support their work, rgisc.org. And Tricia, we're going to have you back on the show. And I'm actually working on a project that can get you to Washington to talk about these issues with your federal officials, but we'll talk about that offline. Thank you so much, Tricia.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you for all the hard work that you're doing at the border, and we appreciate you being on the show today.
No problem. And just very, very quickly, if I have any time, if not, no worries. But you had mentioned about the legislature, and what I wanted to say is, we worked for 10 years on a campaign to get an ordinance to restrict the use of single-use plastic bags, and we finally got it done in Laredo, and then there was lawsuits filed, and it went all the way to the Texas Supreme Court, and they issued their judgment in June. And after 3 years of having this ordinance in Laredo that used to consume 120 million single-use bags every year, all these bags getting into the environment along the river, etc. I mean, Laredo drastically changed and consumer habits started to change, etc. And so what we're working on now is trying to get the changes needed through the state laws, because that's where the change is going to happen. But we're working on a whole bunch of other projects dealing with the river and our sister city Nuevo Laredo, and there's a lot of raw sewer that's still coming into the river that we're trying to address. So we've got a lot of different things that really need a lot of focus and attention, and I thank you for giving us the voice and the platform to get the message out there to all our brothers and sisters out there, all the raza out there. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Tricia. And like Ray said, we'll definitely be sure to keep in communication with you in the near future to have you on again. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break here on People Powered Media, WPPMLP. Talk about the Women's March and my deep FOMO that's going on right now. We'll get into it in a break. Thank you. Welcome back. You're listening to WPPM-LP Philadelphia, people-powered media. That's what I'm talking about. I just love that phrase, so empowering. We again want to thank our WPPM family for allowing us to bring the Race Talk Show podcast experience to the radio airwaves here. And I'm here with my co-host, Yashira Rivera.
Yes, hello.
I believe we're in a you gave us a 2-episode trial period, so we're hoping to hear some good things after this.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again, Ray, for giving me the opportunity to give me the platform for another Latina voice. It's important.
You can never have enough. It's like pitching in baseball. You can never have enough strong Latinas in the building. We have a lot to cover here in this last segment. More kudos, more accolades going to you. Yeah, tell us about your participation in the Women's March coming up and what to expect. It's more relevant than ever.
So again, this is Yaya Rivera. And I want to say that I'm incredibly thrilled that I will be speaking at the Women's March Pennsylvania, also known as Women's March Philadelphia, which is actually a rally at Love Park, which starts at 10 a.m. There's a bit of a confusion because there are 2 march/rallies happening at the same exact time. So I'm going to give everyone that's listening and looking on Facebook Live a little bit of an explanation to what it is and a description. So you have 2 marches. One march, like I had mentioned, is March on Philadelphia, which is a physical march from Logan Square to the the Art Museum, yes. And that is a physical march that is a local chapter not affiliated with the National Women's March organization. Then the second one is the rally, which they are calling the Women's March Pennsylvania, a.k.a. Women's March Philadelphia, which is going to be at Love Park. That is the one where I was recognized that from a speech that I submitted. That will start at 10 a.m. I don't know what time I'm speaking at yet, but the topic that I'm talking about is very near and dear to my heart.
Let me ask you this question. After 3 years of this administration, and the Women's March has been, I want to say there's been a lot of controversy, but there's been a lot of discussion about its relevancy. There's been this attack by some quarters of 2 of the women of color that are part of the senior leadership of the National March, Linda Sarsour and Tamika Mallory, for their association at times with Minister Farrakhan and his anti-Semitic comments. And there's a lot of history with that, with outside factors trying to divide the Jewish community with people of color. So this is like an old, discussion in many ways. But it seems that, the power of women, we just saw a new generation of women get into Congress. So in your mind, what's the relevancy of the Women's March in 2019?
The relevancy is that there still needs to be a platform for women, or women and men, or people that want to see change and want to see positive change. And, I do want to say that there is controversy between both marches on a local level and on a national level, as you mentioned with Farrakhan, and on a local level with leadership. And my response to that will be it was a very hard decision for me to make the decision of speaking, but I feel that my message is more important and more grand than the leaderships at hand. And I am a Latina, Afro-Latina woman who has been given a seat at the table. So for me to not take it, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to myself, to my family who I will be speaking about, and to those who need to hear the importance of reproductive rights and justice. So the importance of it, Ray, back to your question, is that people need a platform to speak up and to show others that we still care, because at the end of the day, activists nationwide and worldwide, we're exhausted. I can't speak on the behalf of everyone, but I can tell you, Ray, being a part of a co-facilitator of a reproductive justice group, helping organizations that provide legal aid to immigration, helping out Puerto Rico as much as I can, being a part of an employer that is very heavily involved with the African American community, and I'm in the community every day. I am front row seats to police brutality. I am front row seats to the injustices and the ugliness that this society brings. So it is exhausting. So this is a way for people to get rejuvenated again, to get excited, to get pumped, and to find that inner little light within them that is literally fizzing out, because it's exhausting, because every day there is news coming at you at such a rapid pace. And
we have to keep intersectionality front and center. So going back to the Puerto Rico conversation, celebrity men get an audience with the governor of Puerto Rico, and these feminist women, fair, having to demand a seat at the table when there's some serious issues going on. So we have to keep that front and center, because there's the issues of women need to be heard, and frankly are the leaders of not only the women's movement but the progressive movement.
No, but to be fair, I feel that patriarchy is embedded in the Latinx culture, excuse me.
Oh, you're going to drop that bomb right at the end of the show? We'll get into that. That's next week. That's next week. Thank you.
No, but there's...
Damn. That's my closing remark there. Oh, of course. Well, that's why we have to continue these conversations.
It's important to understand that Latina women have a lot to say. We are, a force, the AOCs of the world. So, that's why it's important to continue the battle.
Quick hits as we wrap this up. Much respect and solidarity to our LA teachers.
Yes, LA
who
teachers.
Have struck, and there's talk about intersectionality. Why would we underfund one of the biggest school system in the country?
Yeah, it's huge.
So they're fighting a good fight out there. And I did want to note, you have any quick last hits before my last two things?
I don't, just honestly, the one thing is not really a hit, but it's more of a message that kind of transcends with me being a part of the Women's March. We have to acknowledge that we're all in this together, and hatred and going against each other isn't going to fix anything. The moment you turn your face away from one issue, you're turning away from essentially a bigger issue. So be kind.
And my FOMO is, my friends do this to me every year. I talked about all those attractive people that I know earlier in the show, but all these Puerto Ricans that go down to San Juan for the San Sebastian Festival that's happening this weekend in Puerto Rico. Shout out to my homie David Galarza, I'm already on the FOMO, because he's already Facebook Living all the wonderful times he's having. # Sunset 2019. So keep having fun down there on the island. And guess what? And guess what? We've got some great guests coming up. Wanted to give a shout out to one of my little sisters, literally, Christina Vega. She has developed a support group for survivors of domestic violence,
which is huge. I'm really excited.
And she's going to be on the show next week to talk about that. And we're going to talk about we support her, continue that conversation.
Yeah.
Candy Calderon, a nationally recognized Latina health blogger, has agreed to come on the show. We're really excited to have Candy in the building. And one of a guest I've wanted to have on my podcast for many years, Michelle Rosado, a.k.a. the Raging Babe. Looking at the executive director here. She is, during the day, an engineer, and at night, a boxing commentator and boxing promoter. Boricua from Bristol, from the borough, Bucks County in the building. She's got a fight card coming up. We're going to have her to talk about her career, getting into the sports business, media, sports promotion business, and also we're going to talk some boxing. We love sports on on our program here. Thank you, Yaya, and
thank you,
hopefully I'll get out of your probationary period very soon. Thank you for joining WPPMLP People Power Media.